Now let's look at some common roles and responsibilities. First, we'll look at the senior manager. This is a person who's ultimately responsible for the organization security, or sometimes you see this as senior management. That's the one who has the final say. So the buck stops with senior management. The data owner. The data owner is responsible for the classification of data. What do we mean by classification of data? Some data is more important than some other data. So, for example, um, if you have a file that contains social security numbers or date of births, that will be considered sensitive. Or if you have a file that has public data, like information that's available on the company's website, the level of protection of the file with sensitive data is more than the level of protection on the file with public data. So the data owner is also like a manager who is responsible for the classification of data. Data custodian. Data custodian is one who preserves data. You would normally see this alignment with someone who does data backups. So the data custodian is the one who takes orders from the data owner and backs up or preserves that data. An auditor is one who performs security audits. So auditors could be internal or external. They basically go through an assessment process to make sure that the systems or the organization is secure, and they report the findings to senior management. A user is an individual who accesses the system. So this is one of the people that you are trying to protect against, sadly. Um, and also people that you want to support. You want to make sure that they have the right access or level of permissions before they access a system or resources. The security professional is one who ensures that the security posture of the organization is intact. So, security professionals will be your security staff, such as security admins, firewall administrators, your information security officer, and basically anyone who has a security role. They ensure that the assets of the organization are protected. Control frameworks. What is a control? Simply put, a control is a measure, a security measure put in place to improve security. Frameworks are like best practices or systems um, or guides that is put in place or implemented. COBIT. COBIT stands for Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology. It's basically a framework for information security governance best practices. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. NIST is an agency that produces best practices and standards that agencies use or both public and private sector use. They're best known for their 800 series special publications. ISO is another framework that deals with information security best practices. ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library, is a framework that deals with uh, IT service management, so information technology service management. COSO is a security framework that studies 5 internal controls for financial reporting. So it deals with um, prevention of financial fraud. The 5 areas are control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information communications, and monitoring. PCI DSS. This is a security framework that deals with credit card usage. So the credit card companies came together and came up with this self-governing regulation, and it deals with security controls and compliance for the use of credit cards in financial transactions. FRAP is a security framework that deals with risk management. It's the keyword that you see on the exam to be mindful of is narrow assumption of risk. My little cheat sheet or way to remember this is frap. I think of a frappuccino in a narrow cup from Starbucks. So when you see the words narrow assumption of risk, it's usually referring to frap. Octave is a self-directed risk evaluation. CRAM is a staged approach to deal with technology and non-technology security risks. Due care is using reasonable care in your approach to security or your approach to implementing or managing your organization. This will be referred to as what a prudent person would do, so what a reasonable person would do. So if you go to court, this standard, the due care standard, is what's going to be the measuring or the yardstick to judge whether your company or your senior management is liable for any type of security breaches. So what would a reasonable person do? And if you stray from that, then you might be held accountable. Due diligence deals with performing activities to prevent harm. Were your firewalls in place? Did you put the right security controls? Is there physical security? Is there technical security controls? Do you have the right admin controls? Where did you perform background checks before hiring your employees? So that's what due diligence is about, doing the right research and implementing those security controls. Compliance. Compliance has to do with abiding by legislation and any type of rules or laws that are in place. Your company needs to not only abide by those laws or regulations, but also show that it follows best industry standard best practices, so that way you're not held liable if any type of security incident occurs. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This was part of the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984, and it's basically to cover computer crimes that crosses state boundaries. Computer Security Act of 1987. This is an act that goes further than the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and it basically examines the security posture of federal systems. National Information Infrastructure Protection Act of 1996. This is an extension of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and it covers international crimes on computers, and also um, crimes against national infrastructure. The Paperwork Reduction Act of 1995. This is a requirement that federal agencies need to get the permission of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, before they could request any type of public information or any type of information from the general public. FISMA, Federal Information Security Management Act. This is an act that stipulates that federal agencies need to implement a security program. One of those programs is the RMF, like the Risk Management Framework, which goes through a series of stages in order to secure any system before the system goes live or goes into production. The Government Information Security Reform Act of 2000. This is an extension of the Paperwork Reduction Act, and it has 5 basic purposes for establishing this particular act. Privacy is a big subject in the United States and in Europe as well. It basically means that everyone has the right to privacy. It was derived from the Fourth Amendment in the United States Constitution, which states that people need to feel secure in their homes. It's very important that if an organization needs to monitor like email traffic or post cameras in a facility, they also need to let the employees or staff know that they're being recorded or email traffic is being monitored. That way you won't break any privacy laws. The Privacy Act of 1974. This act prevents the federal government or federal agencies from disclosing private information to anyone without the consent of the person or party that the information applies to. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986. Basically, this is an expansion of the wiretap laws that they had on the books, and they have broadened this law to include computer crimes. So any type of unauthorized access of someone else's computer resources, you would be breaking this law. So hacking is what this law falls under. Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, also known as CALEA. This is basically an amendment of the Electronic Communication Privacy Act of 1986. And the amendment includes wiretapping laws to be made available to law enforcement, provided that they have a warrant. So service providers like Verizon, AT&T could release customer information if this was a part of an investigation, but law enforcement agencies or agents need to produce a warrant. The economic and protection of proprietary information. This act is basically an espionage act or anti-espionage act. It prevents any individual or company from stealing the ideas or intellectual property or trade secrets of another organization. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, also known as HIPAA. This is a law that prevents health organizations like hospitals or clinics from disclosing the information, health information of any of their patients. Also provides protections on health information, on how health information is stored and how it's protected. So your health information needs to be encrypted and well protected so that no one can access that.